Creative Babble.
Previously on Pretend, we learned about Saint Jovite Kota Youngblood, a hockey dad claiming to be part of the U.S. Delta Force unit. Delta Force operators, by the way, are the most highly trained elite forces in the U.S. military. Everything they do is classified. However, we know that they're involved in counterterrorism, hostage negotiations, and reconnaissance missions. And they take orders directly from the president. But Kota Youngblood, he's no Delta Force agent. He's a con man. Today, we're going to listen in on Kota Youngblood's detention hearing. It's 2 hours long, but I will do my best to pare it down for you. This episode is going to frustrate the hell out of you. You're going to learn more details about this case, and the more you learn, the more questions you will have. It is maddening. But trust me, it is a wild ride. The world Kota Youngblood created is baffling, and the amount of money he stole from his victims is staggering. I'm Javier Leiva, and this is Pretend. Stories about real people pretending to be someone else. Picture this, a foggy evening, the whisper of secrets in the air, and an invitation to step back into the glamorous and mysterious 1920s. That's the backdrop of June's Journey, the game that's been keeping me glued to my phone lately. Instead of doom scrolling on social media, I am actually playing the part of June Parker, a daring detective with a personal mission to solve her sister's murder. And let me tell you, it is a roller coaster of emotions and puzzles. What's to love? Well, first of all, the thrill of hunting for hidden objects. I'm a sucker for these kinds of games. It's kind of like those books that we grew up with, but with a storyline that keeps thickening. Plus, the game takes place in New York to Paris, uncovering clues of scandalous family secrets that make you feel like a real detective. If you're ready for a dose of mystery, romance, and the glamour of the 1920s, June's Journey is waiting for you. Download it for free on iOS and Android, and let's see who cracks the case first.
For United States of America versus Saint Jovite Youngblood.
Good morning to you, Mr. Youngblood. We're here on the government's obligations with regard to the preliminary and detention hearing. Are you ready to proceed?
We are, Your Honor.
Call your first witness.
The government's witness is FBI agent Lindsay Wilkinson. Kota Youngblood is accused of scamming dozens of families out of their life savings. But today, the entire hearing is focused on just one of Youngblood's victims, Eric Perardi. Here's Matt Harding with the U.S. Attorney's Office.
What exactly the story that Mr. Perardi was told that led him to give money to Mr. Youngblood?
Yes, so Mr. Perardi and Mr. Youngblood had known each other for about 6 years. Their sons played hockey together. And at some point, Mr. Perardi's son was on a trip and he gets a call from one of his friends saying, Mr. Youngblood needs to speak with you immediately. There's a situation going on with your family. And shortly after that, Mr. Youngblood and Mr. Perardi connect back in Austin, Texas. And that's when Mr. Youngblood makes representations to Mr. Perardi that Mr. Perardi's in grave danger from the cartel because of his ex-wife had been affiliated with the cartel, had taken out a hit on his family because she was the beneficiary of an insurance policy for Mr. Perardi. And as a result of that, he needed protection and that Mr. Youngblood could provide that protection to him.
Based on your investigation, have multiple folks told you that Mr. Youngblood does not own a phone or does not prefer to talk on the phone or text?
Yes.
Have you also discovered through your investigation that Mr. Youngblood prefers to work through intermediaries when possible?
Yes.
Okay, so Mr. Youngblood tells Mr. Perardi, in essence, your family's in danger because your ex-wife owes money to a drug cartel. I can protect you. Why would Mr. Youngblood be in a position to stop a drug cartel from killing Mr. Parati's family?
Mr. Youngblood claimed to be prior military, special forces. He said he had direct information from government sources.
Were you able to confirm whether or not Mr. Youngblood has ever served the United States military?
He has not.
And do you have any record of Mr. Youngblood ever being employed by the United States government?
There is no record.
In Mr. Parati's case or in any other case, did you determine that there was any actual legitimate threat by a drug cartel or any other source to these folks?
No.
So that's sort of the extortion side of things.
Yes.
Give me money, I can protect you from the drug cartel. You said there's also kind of an investment fraud scheme. Can you describe that for the court?
So for Mr. Parati's, for his specific situation, it was extortion primarily, but also had an investment fraud nexus that all of the money he sent would then be an investment in clocks, or he would receive money in return for gold bars and would receive an exorbitant return at the end. And it would also protect his family in the short term.
Was this sort of weird mixture of extortion and investment fraud also sort of a signature of Mr. Youngblood that he committed against multiple victims?
Yes, we either saw it was extortion and investment then extortion, some combination or one or the other.
Kota Youngblood didn't just demand money for his schemes, he promised he would get the money back with interest. As a sign of good faith, Kota Youngblood would offer his victim something of value as collateral.
He offered a bat, which he said was once the famous baseball player Lou Gehrig's and had his DNA on it. And he also offered a very old Civil War flag, which he represented to Mr. Parati as being almost $2.5 million.
We'll talk about the bat more in a minute, but let's stick with the flag for a moment. He claimed it was worth about $2.5 million.
Yes, sir.
Did Mr. Parati and later you follow up on that claim?
Yes, we did.
What did you learn?
Mr. Parati had reached out to an antique flag dealer. I reached out to the same individual. The individual actually said he sold that flag to Mr. Youngblood and that the flag itself was worth $85,000. He said that he had sold it to Mr. Youngblood for $75,000, but had not been paid in full for it.
All right, so Mr. Parati is told, give me money so I can protect your family. By the way, you'll get a big return on your investment. Here's some collateral to secure you. Does Mr. Parati pay?
Yes, he does.
Approximately how much money does Mr. Parati pay at first?
So I have a couple notes on that, but it was approximately $70,000 beginning July 8th, 2022, followed with an $86,000 payment July 21st, 2022, and $83,000 payment on July 27th, 2022.
And was this money transferred directly from Mr. Parati to Mr. Youngblood?
No, it wasn't.
Let's talk about clocks for a minute.
Yeah, let's talk about the clocks, because this was by far the strangest twist in this already bizarre story. Kota Youngblood told Eric Parati that he needed money to protect his family. He instructed Eric to write a check, but not to Youngblood. He instructed Eric Parati to write a check instead to an antique clock dealer named James Holloway.
Mr. Youngblood directed Mr. Parati to send the money to James Holloway. He said to represent it as an investment in antique clocks. And since that was Mr. Holloway's business, and he often conducted business with large cash transactions, that would not raise suspicion at the bank. So he said this was the best way to send money to him.
Mr. Parati made these payments to Mr. Holloway. Mr. Holloway then would often withdraw these deposits in cash.
Yes, and provide that cash to Mr. Youngblood.
In other words, money laundering. Youngblood assured Parati that he would receive a 30% return on his investment.
In approximately October of 22, Mr. Parati tells Mr. Youngblood, listen, I've given you all the money I can.
Yes.
What happens then between the two of them?
Mr. Youngblood expresses that they need to find more money and asks Mr. Parati if there's any way he can find more money, asks him to ask others for more money. So Mr. Parati starts reaching out to family and friends for help.
And in some cases, at least, do those family and friends make additional payments to Mr. Youngblood to help out Mr. Parati?
Yes, they do.
Believing that Mr. Parati's family was in danger?
Yes, or they spoke with Mr. Youngblood and heard that danger themselves.
Approximately how much money did they give to Mr. Youngblood?
Approximately $900,000.
But here's another twist. According to this FBI agent, James Holloway is just another victim of Kota Youngblood.
Have you identified Mr. Holloway as a person who has also given money to Mr. Youngblood under false pretenses?
Yes, I have.
Can you describe what you know of the relationship between Mr. James Holloway and Mr. Youngblood.
So James Holloway seemed to have met him under some sort of business interaction dealing with clocks. And from that, Mr. Youngblood started asking him if he'd like to make investments.
At some point, does Mr. Youngblood ask Mr. James Holloway for a loan to pay for a certain expense?
Yes, he asked him for a $20,000 loan, I believe, to pay for his sister's funeral.
Is Mr. Youngblood's sister dead?
No, she's not. Mr. Holloway had been told after some of the investment regarding the extortion claims that his son, Lane Holloway, was in danger from the cartel, that they had been having some kind of dealings with the cartel, and now his family at one point was kidnapped, Lane Holloway's family, that his daughters were possibly, one was going to be sold, I believe, to the cartel or to pay off a debt to the cartel, and then at some point they had been murdered by the cartel.
So Mr. Youngblood, at some point along the way, tells Mr. James Holloway, your son, Lane Holloway, and their family, his family are dead.
Yes.
Murdered by the cartel.
Yes.
Is that true?
No, it's not.
Is Mr. Lane Holloway sitting here in the courtroom?
He is sitting here in the courtroom.
You can't make this shit up. How in the world do you convince someone that their son is dead and still manage to believe them after you find out the kid is not dead?
Approximately how much money did Mr. James Holloway pay to Mr. Youngblood?
Approximately over $2 million.
At some point along the way, just like with Mr. Berardi, Mr. James Holloway runs out of money, correct?
Yes.
When Mr. James Holloway tells Mr. Youngblood, I'm out of money, what does Mr. Youngblood say?
He suggests he finds other individuals. At some point, he suggests that he sell his home to get some finances out of it.
And does Mr. James Holloway find other individuals to give money to Mr. Youngblood?
Yes, he does.
Does he, in fact, sell his home so that he can give money to Mr. Youngblood?
He does.
This story is about to get even stranger. As part of his extortion campaign against Eric Berardi, Kota Youngblood needed to create the illusion that Eric Berardi's family was in danger.
During that time span, did there start to be derogatory, defamatory posts being made about him and others?
Yes, we saw a large number of posts online made regarding Mr. Berardi and many of his associates or family members.
You know, I know a lot of these were pretty graphic.
One review reads, quote, Eric Berardi over at the Crossroad in Cedar Park will be the next closest hookup for hockey sex and drugs, unquote.
So one in the complaint alludes to Mr. Berardi and his flunkies hitting on underage girls and offering them drugs for sexual favors. Others mentioned Mr. Berardi or his family's involvement in the cartel, made references to associates being either having homophobic tendencies or homosexual tendencies, or being a pedophile in some way.
What was Mr. Youngblood telling Mr. Berardi about these posts, and what was Mr. Berardi's reaction to these posts?
Mr. Youngblood was telling Mr. Berardi this was the cartel's way of increasing pressure on him. Mr. Berardi has expressed that he felt certainly threatened. It certainly increased his payment or expedited his payments when he would see numerous posts about his business and his family.
And then did Mr. Youngblood create fake online personas for himself or modify personas for himself?
He did. He instructed someone to create a number of fake online articles about him, kind of showing different personas. He also instructed someone to redact court articles and other online articles about his true persona.
And now's as good a time as any. Who was that person?
That person was Lane Holloway, who is the son of James Holloway.
Excuse me? The antique clock dealer's son was in cahoots with Kota Youngblood?
He also directed Lane Holloway to spread flyers around the neighborhood, which these were kind of negative, nasty, defamatory flyers.
Let's talk about Lane Holloway, the son of James Holloway. You've identified Mr. Lane Holloway as also a person who has been victimized by Mr. Youngblood, correct?
Yes.
Can you describe, again, general level, as best you can, what Mr. Youngblood told Mr. Lane Holloway to victimize him?
Lane Holloway was told by Mr. Youngblood that Lane's wife's family had connections to the cartel. They were of Hispanic descent, and that individuals in their family were involved with the cartel. And as a result, him and his family were in grave danger, including his daughters.
I want to stop you right there. The story that Mr. Youngblood tells to Lane Holloway is a almost word-for-word repeat of what he tells Eric Perardi about his threat from the cartel, correct?
It's extremely similar.
Well, based on this information, what does Lane Holloway do?
Lane Holloway, at some point, decides to flee his home in the middle of the night.
And why is that?
Because he was afraid, and he was directed by Mr. Youngblood to leave, told that he was in grave danger, and picked up and left.
Mr. Youngblood told Mr. Lane Holloway that essentially he was in imminent danger.
In imminent danger, needed to get out of the house almost immediately.
And so what does Lane Holloway and his family do?
They pick up and leave their house immediately.
Be honest, is this not the craziest damn court audio you've ever listened to? Let me sum this up. At some point, Kota Youngblood convinces an antique clock dealer's son that he too is in danger of getting killed or kidnapped by the cartel. So scared that he and his family just picked up and left in the middle of the night.
Could you describe for the court the state of that house and how it was left?
The house appeared to me to be completely abandoned. There were cobwebs, cockroaches. It looked like no one had lived in it. We didn't dare open the fridge for the smell, but it was clearly looked like it had been abandoned.
After Lane and his family leave town, what do? To hide their identity.
To hide their identity, they changed their names.
Well, first of all, why did they change their names?
Mr. Youngblood told them they needed to change their names for their safety, and he, in fact, encouraged Mr. Lane Holloway to get a tattoo of this new name on himself to really prove this new identity so that he couldn't be mistaken for his former identity.
And does Lane get to that tattoo?
He does.
Ultimately, where do you find Lane Holloway and his family?
An FBI agent finds them in Florida in an extended stay hotel.
Going back to the derogatory posts made against Mr. Perardi and his associates, as well as the threatening phone calls, were you able to determine who made those posts and calls?
We were.
And who did that?
That was Mr. Lane Holloway at Mr. Youngblood's direction.
And according to Mr. Lane Holloway, did Lane come up with the wording, or?
Mr. Lane Holloway told us that Mr. Youngblood would dictate this information over the phone. He had numerous handwritten notes that appeared to be jotted down by him.
These, again, going back sort of for preliminary hearing purposes, these derogatory posts and threatening phone calls were made while Mr. Lane Holloway and his family were in Florida.
Yes.
And so those would all be interstate communications from Florida to Texas, both the derogatory posts as well as the phone call. And they were made in furtherance of the scheme.
Yes.
As you described earlier, to force or to raise the pressure on Mr. Perardi to pay.
Yes.
At this point, when you found Mr. Lane Holloway and his family in Florida, what does James Holloway believe about Lane?
He believed him to be dead.
Still?
Yes.
What did you tell James Holloway?
We told him that his son was alive.
What was his response to you?
He didn't believe us and asked for proof.
I want to jump to May 1st of 2023 in an undercover operation that was conducted by the FBI.
The purpose of that operation was to confirm Mr. Perardi's claims that Mr. Youngblood had made these statements to him. We introduced an undercover in the same way that since Mr. Perardi had been introducing other individuals in his life, we introduced an undercover as another individual in Mr. Perardi's life that could provide money to help him out.
So this was another source of cash, as far as Mr. Youngblood knew.
Yes.
Another source of cash to protect Mr. Perardi.
Eric Perardi, Kota Youngblood, and the undercover agent meet at a Carrabba's in Austin, Texas. And the whole thing was being recorded and monitored by FBI surveillance.
Mr. Youngblood is completely controlling the conversation.
What did Mr. Youngblood say to our undercover about his military experience?
He said that he had been in the military for over a decade, that he had served in, he was special forces previously.
And what was Mr. Youngblood's ask of our undercover, and what was the purported purpose of this ask?
He asked our undercover for $76,000 to help pay or protect Mr. Perardi and his family from the cartel.
So that's the extortion side. Did Mr. Youngblood pitch sort of an investment scheme to the undercover?
He did. He said that he had gold that basically, if the undercover gave this $76,000, he could expect to double his money in a short amount of time, and that he would be able to split a quarter of the gold that Mr. Youngblood would be able to access. And
Mr. Youngblood's story was that through his unidentified government contacts, this money would allow him to get gold out of Mexico or some other South American or Central American area, and it would be split between himself, Mr. Perardi, our undercover, and then one of the other individuals Mr. Perardi had What collateral did he offer up?
He offered him the Lou Gehrig bat.
And that was, excuse me, were you done?
He told him it was $1 million bat, and it was Lou Gehrig's.
And this was the bat that he had previously told Mr. Parati had Lou Gehrig's DNA on.
Here's another detail about the case that's gonna make you scream.
What did Mr. Youngblood tell our undercover about his son Eventine?
He told him that he had been killed approximately 6 months ago.
And what was the reason that his son Eventine had been murdered?
That he had been involved with the cartel and had been murdered as a result.
That's the son who's sitting here in the courtroom now.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Youngblood claimed to have paid a substantial portion of his own money to pay off Mr. Parati's family's alleged drug debt, correct?
He did. He told our undercover he paid over $4 million to pay off Mr. Parati's debt out of his own money.
Youngblood told the undercover agents that his son was killed 6 months ago. Doesn't his son play hockey with Eric's son? Who lies about that? Yet, the FBI agent and the prosecutors just move on. Again, so many questions.
What did he tell the undercover about what happened to it, or about his parents?
He told the undercover that his parents had been killed, I believe.
In a car accident some time ago?
When he was younger.
Is that true?
No, they are alive today.
I
spoke with them last week, at least.
What was the plan? So Mr. Youngblood tells the undercover, give me 76 grand, I'll protect Mr. Parati. You'll also get a bunch of money back, including a quarter of some gold I'm going to smuggle into the United States.
The plan is that the undercover will bring the $76,000 in cash the following day to Mr. Youngblood.
Directly to Mr. Youngblood?
Yes, sir.
The next day, you set up surveillance at that location?
Yes.
Obviously, the undercover does not show up and give $76,000 to Mr. Youngblood.
That's correct.
The undercover makes an excuse, and that's the end.
And it does not appear. Yeah.
So that's the scheme in a nutshell. This next part is interesting because the FBI agent sheds some light into Kota Youngblood's past relationship with his parents. Here's the FBI agent talking about young Kota and his father, Dennis Schuler.
You had a chance to speak to Mr. Dennis Schuler Sr. about Mr. Youngblood, correct?
Yes.
What did Mr. Dennis Schuler Sr. have to say about Mr. Youngblood's character, essentially?
He said that he had been a perpetual liar most of his life, that he had told so many lies that in high school at some point he took out credit cards in Mr. Dennis Schuler Sr.'s name, over 10 credit cards, and I think took out a $20,000 debt. He said that the rest of his life has watched his credit reports out of fear that his name and credit would be abused by Mr. Youngblood. He told his father that I think I mentioned, was in the Marines. He also told him that at one point that he needed money because the Russian mafia was after him and that his finger had been cut off by the Russian mafia.
When told that Mr. Youngblood had been charged with fraud, was his father surprised?
No, he said he wasn't surprised that his son was charged.
Mr. Youngblood has peddled to various people over the years.
They typically involved sports memorabilia such as the baseball bats. We've heard about ones from Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Mickey Mantle, and others. Also Star Wars memorabilia, famous artwork. I think Rembrandt's been mentioned, and also other collectible items. Gold coins often came up.
The way I understand your testimony and the evidence in this case is that Mr. Youngblood is claiming this bat is extraordinarily valuable because it has Lou Gehrig's DNA on it. Can you describe for the court how this was packaged and stored as far as you are aware?
The undercover bat specifically was wrapped in plastic, and a number of the other victims' bats reported to be wrapped in plastic.
We talked about this. Lou Gehrig played in the 30s, correct?
Yes.
So let's just use 1940 as a date. Talking 80 plus years. Does the lab have an opinion, or did they give you any insight about how likely it is DNA would survive 80 years in those conditions? My
conversation with the lab, they told me it's highly unlikely that DNA could survive on that surface. They described that wood was a difficult surface to keep DNA on in the best of conditions, and that certainly plastic could actually increase bacterial growth on the bat and would therefore kind of contaminate any DNA on it.
Mr. Youngblood would defraud and attempt to defraud random people.
Yes.
Could you give some examples to the court?
Yeah, some examples is the woman that he knew from going to estate sales. He also went to a golf course, so the owners or managers of the golf course. Also an individual he met on an airplane. the man he bought fish from for his aquarium, and the bartender at the golf course as well.
Let's talk about the man he met on the airplane.
They traveled to Las Vegas for work frequently and would frequently see Mr. Youngblood on the flight to Vegas from Austin.
At some point, they sat next to each other on the plane, correct?
Yes. Mr. Youngblood asked him to give money, and the individual declined to do so. So when I went to the golf course, I introduced myself as a special agent and asked to speak to a manager, and the individual said, "Are you here about Kota?"
You hadn't mentioned Mr. Youngblood.
I hadn't mentioned anything.
On July 13th, 2023, we executed a search warrant at both Mr. Youngblood's house and Mr. Holloway's house, as well as a couple other locations, correct?
Yes.
Did you find anything of significance in Mr. Youngblood's safe?
We found a note. It was a printout of a kind of text message and a timeline of events that Mr. Perardi has said that was written by him, and it more or less shows a timeline of Mr. Perardi's entire the scheme that he's kind of suffered from.
So essentially the story, he's saying, "I'm giving you this money for this, you've told me this," that kind of thing?
On the date of the search warrant, we found at least 5 guns in the home.
You arrested him at the airport, correct?
Yes.
Where was Mr. Youngblood traveling or intending to travel when you arrested him?
To Las Vegas.
How much cash did he have on him approximately when you arrested him?
A little over $18,000.
Where you believe that money came from?
Yeah. But between the search warrant and right before the arrest, have identified that 1,000 of it came from one identified victim. About 12,000 of it came from another individual that took out a loan for Mr. Youngblood and gave him the cash.
Since Mr. Youngblood mentioned his gambling, he told you the 18,000 in his wallet came from a jackpot he won.
Yes.
You retained records from that casino, correct?
Yes.
And in fairness to Mr. Youngblood, he did win about $200,000 in gambling in May of 2023 from that casino.
He did.
In June of 23, he lost $280,000 at that casino.
That's correct, according to their record.
And in the year of 2023, all told, from that one casino, he has lost net over $700,000.
Yes.
So that was the government's case against Saint Jovite Kota Youngblood. When we come back, we're going to hear from the defense. And I have to say, they bring up some good points. That's after the break.
Agent, I'm not going to go into as much detail as you've already gone through, but I'll try to just signal the topics I want to talk about.
Yes, ma'am.
You just ask a few follow-up questions. So you said that your work on this case started in April of this year?
Yes, ma'am.
This is Kota Youngblood's defense attorney, Charlotte Herring.
You described this as both an extortion scheme and an investment scheme?
In Mr. Perardi's case, specifically.
And in your experience, this is sort of an unusual scheme. Is that fair?
Yes.
Extortion, generally, when you hear about someone with concern about extortion, it's they're being asked to pay money to make a threat go away, right?
I think that's fair to say.
That's what extortion is. It's most basic,
yeah.
Right? And here, it sounds like in your investigation, what individuals believed was that they were being asked to continue to pay money, but this threat never went away.
New components of that threat continued to arise.
And in this case, people were making payments for threats to go away, but also many of them believed they would receive returns on their investment.
In some of the victim situations, yes.
Many of them remain victims, if you will, right?
Yes.
Have you ever seen a scheme in which sort of collateral is put up as an extortion payment?
Personally, I have not.
In your work as an FBI agent, you've not seen a scheme like this before?
I have not.
If a cartel is wanting money, why would they agree that that money could be invested in collateral?
I don't believe that money was to be invested in collateral, but the collateral would serve as an object they could keep to ensure that they would later receive the windfall that they could expect in some victim cases.
If the money is going to a collateral, let's get some kind of object, right? How is it going to the cartel?
I believe the collateral was given after money of you can rest assured that you will get money back because you're holding this valuable item if there is an issue.
So if you get threatened, you can also make a 30% return on your investment. Is it unusual in your experience that individuals who receive threats like this don't call any form of law enforcement for a long time?
I haven't had experience with a case with these factors.
In general, if someone's has an immediate threat, which in this case, it sounds like threats on the lives of family members, it's pretty common that people call, whether it's 911 or the FBI, walk into the FBI, call the FBI, right?
The FBI would advise that if you felt in danger for your life imminently.
What was your understanding as to why the individuals had not sought police assistance?
My understanding would be that Mr. Youngblood, in some way instructed them not to go to the police or directed them that it would cause additional harm to their family. So
when he comes to the FBI, the story he told you, or the threat that he told you about, as best I kind of pieced it together, is something about his second ex-wife was using drugs and was involved with the cartel. So the cartel was going to go after him and his family and possibly kill him so that she would get his life insurance money, right?
His ex-wife and a family member of hers were connected to the cartel or were involved in money laundering.
Why would Mr. Perardi find it plausible that the cartel was after him and his family?
I'm not sure I could speak to how he would believe it, but, we've heard multiple narratives and it was clear that he believed it and that story had been told to other individuals as well.
Why didn't he call or contact the FBI back in the summer of 2022 when he said these kinds of statements by Mr. Youngblood started?
Mr. Perardi reported that the reason he contacted us was after the incident with the flag owner. He said when he reached out to the flag owner and realized that the flag was a fake, it started unraveling the story in his mind that there were too many lies, and that's when he brought it to the FBI. I believe before that he didn't bring it because he believed the story.
Why, in your understanding, would Mr. Perardi have believed that his second ex-wife had any connection to the cartel?
Mr. Youngblood had told him he was taking out a hit on his family, or she had taken out a hit on him because of the insurance policy. He had also later made indications that Mr. Perardi's ex-wife's, a relative of hers, had been laundering money for the cartel through her business.
Why hadn't he changed the beneficiary of his life insurance policy if he was divorced?
I don't know when he did or did not. I couldn't speak to that.
At some point, or kind of before approaching the FBI, Mr. Perardi thought he was going to make money on this investment in these collateral objects, right?
On a number of the recordings, he mentions that it's the reason he's doing this is to keep his kids safe. But
he also he
has been
money.
Yes.
He got paid money back as well.
The defense is questioning the victims' motivations. Were they genuinely scared for their lives? Or was this just another investment opportunity gone wrong?
Mr. Perardi, you said he did receive some money back on his investment. Other individuals also received some payments back for their investment?
Yes, some portion of the victims did.
Youngblood's attorney also alluded to Eric Perardi's involvement in recruiting friends and family members into this scheme. She also points out that the payments were never made to Kota Youngblood directly.
No checks were made payable to Mr. Youngblood.
I don't recall any checks being made payable to Mr. Youngblood.
The checks were made to James Holloway, the antique clock dealer.
Went to Mr. Holloway first. You pulled his bank record.
Yes.
You saw that.
Yes.
And he deposited those checks into his bank account.
Yes.
And up until, I think, very recently, you believed he was a co-conspirator with Mr. Youngblood in this case, right?
Yes.
By the way, according to court records, James Holloway has not been charged with any crimes, but he is currently being investigated.
And it was your understanding over the course of your investigation that individuals were led to believe that if they didn't pay the cartel, they would receive bad Yelp reviews. Is that right?
That wasn't my understanding. I think the Yelp reviews continued to come, and that made them feel this pressure that the cartel was continuing to target their family.
So the cartel is somehow connected to the Yelp reviews in these individuals' minds.
The individuals reported that they felt that Mr. Youngblood had told them these Yelp reviews were being made in some way connection to the cartel.
Have you, in your experience as an FBI agent, heard of the cartels using Yelp reviews to enforce threats?
I have not.
That's not what you would generally think of when you hear cartel threat enforcement activity.
I don't investigate the cartel, but I don't.
That's all I have, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Then it was time for Judge Mark Lane to decide whether or not to detain Kota Youngblood until his trial.
Based on the evidence that I've heard, Mr. Youngblood, you have an elaborate history of not telling the truth. After hearing the testimony, all I can say is, wow, the number of lies, the depth of those lies is beyond anything I've ever heard. And I've been around a long time. Absolutely incredible. But the reality is there are a number of victims, and there's a lot of money, in the millions of dollars. And there may be a net, but the reality is the money seems to flow one way, primarily to Mr. Youngblood. And you found a number of people who were either foolish, ignorant, afraid, greedy, whatever it may be, whatever their motivation. The bottom line is it was incumbent upon you, Mr. Youngblood, to do what you said you were going to do, buying through yourself or your intermediaries before you were entitled to any money that you got from those victims, no matter what character trait you want to attribute to them. The money always seemed to go one way, went to a guy who doesn't work. There's nothing here that indicates any work whatsoever. If you had a work history, Ms. Herring would have shared it with me. You're a poor gambler. Frankly, you're like every gambler I've ever known. They have a great month, and the other 11, they get hammered. Or it's just over and over. There's no such thing as a good gambler. They're all losing. And let's be real clear. The weight of the evidence, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know where this is going to end up one day. The weight of the evidence is overwhelming against you, Mr. Youngblood. I'm going to find that the government has proven by a preponderance of the evidence that you're a serious risk of flight. I'm also going to find that the government has established by clear and convincing evidence that, let me say this right, there is a serious risk that you will obstruct or attempt to obstruct justice or threaten or injure or intimidate or attempt to injure, threaten, and intimidate prospective witnesses and even jurors in this eventual case if it goes to trial. If I were to have set conditions in this case, I would have gone through them all with you, told you what they are, and at the very bottom I would have said you would have had to sign. And you would have signed right above an attestation that said, I promise to obey all conditions of release, to appear as directed, and surrender to serve any sentence imposed. Mr. Youngblood, I wouldn't trust you with $10. I wouldn't trust you with any important decision in my life, and I trust that most of the people in this courtroom wouldn't either. Your word is incapable of belief or value as it relates to a promise to abide by conditions. There are no conditions that I can set that could provide for the safety of the community, prevent you from potentially obstructing or attempting to obstruct justice, or fleeing, going somewhere else. Lastly, I always hope there's a special place for thieves one day. But for me, as the son of a career military officer, one who survived Vietnam, who raised a family, and we were never rich, I have a particular disdain for anybody who steals the valor of the men and women who really earned it on a battlefield or earned it in uniform. And so good luck to you, sir. I'm going to order your detention. I'll put together a short written order that memorializes the findings that we've had today. I'm going to take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to start with the next case. All right.
This didn't go so well for Kota Youngblood. And this was just the preliminary and detention hearing. We haven't even gotten to the trial yet. Unfortunately, I don't have the recordings of the actual trial, but we do know this. a jury reached their decision and convicted Youngblood on 4 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of money laundering. Kota Youngblood is awaiting sentencing and faces up to 90 years in prison. That's it for today's episode. We'll be back soon. We're feverishly working on the new series. It's pretty crazy. I don't want to talk about it yet. Part of the reason why is because I am working on 2 really big investigations right now, and I'm not quite sure which one to lead with. So if you want to be the first to listen to it, just sign up for my Patreon. Not only are you supporting an independent podcast, but you'll get access to early episodes, ad-free, plus bonus content. Let me tell you guys, I'm running on fumes here. So I got people working round the clock on this. So we'll pump out the episodes as soon as possible. But, you know, these are investigative journalism pieces, and we want to make sure we get it right. The results of some of these investigations could lead to prosecution, and we just want to make sure we got everything buttoned up. All right, that's it for today. Today's episode was written and researched by me, Javier Leiva, and was edited by the talented Punith Shenoy with the Podcast Pundits. All right, talk to you soon.
Creative back.